Okay. So you guys have been sending in this How to Human thing, and we're on part 3 now.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence and empathy.
Right.
And so we're going to take a deep dive into
Let's
it.
do it. Let's extract the core insights here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See if we can give everybody that aha moment about what this all means, really.
Yeah.
And why it matters for just like your daily life, how you connect with other people, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. When you think about How to Human, like we're all just sort of figuring it out as we go along, right? There is no manual.
Right.
But this guide in particular is really interesting because it's talking about building like an inner resilience,
Okay.
like being balanced and adaptable. And a huge part of that is understanding yourself and others emotionally. So we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts of what that really means.
Right. So let's get into the definitions here. When we're talking about emotional intelligence, EQ, what are we really talking about?
Yeah.
What is empathy? What's the core of all of this?
So EQ, or emotional intelligence, as it's described in the section of How to Human, is really your ability to kind of tune in to the emotional signals, both within yourself and around you and other people. Recognizing what those emotions are, understanding what they mean, and importantly, managing your own emotional world, but then also picking up on and being able to thoughtfully respond to the feelings of others.
Okay, so what are the pieces that make up EQ?
Yeah. So How to Human breaks it down into 5 core areas.
Yeah.
And they're all interconnected. So first, there's self-awareness, being able to recognize, okay, what am I feeling and why am I feeling this way? Then there's self-regulation.
Okay.
And that's all about managing those feelings so they're not, sort of hijacking you and making you make decisions that you might regret later.
Okay.
There's motivation, which is really interesting. It's that sort of inner drive, that fuel that keeps you going even when things are hard.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have empathy, which is the ability to kind of step into somebody else's shoes and get a sense of what they might be feeling. And then finally, social skills, which is really how you use all of this in interacting with other people. So these 5 are like the gears in your emotional engine. And when they're all working together, well, everything runs pretty smoothly. But when one is off, it can throw the whole system off.
Yeah. Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit more about empathy. Where does that fit into this whole emotional intelligence thing?
So empathy is really highlighted as a vital component.
Okay.
It's almost like the oil that keeps those gears turning smoothly. It's not just about intellectually understanding where someone else is coming from. It's about really getting a sense of what it might feel like to be in their shoes. What are they feeling? What's their perspective? And then responding with compassion and care.
So how does this work in real life? I mean, like in our everyday interactions, where do we see EQ and empathy actually making a difference?
Well, it's really everywhere. Think about communication. If you've got good EQ, you're going to be more attuned to those subtle cues that people are giving off, like a change in tone or body language. That's going to allow you to have more clear and effective conversations. When disagreements arise, EQ can help you manage your own reactions and see the situation from the other person's perspective.
Right.
Which makes resolving conflict so much easier. Even when you're making decisions, emotional intelligence is about taking into account the emotional impact on yourself and on the other people who are involved.
Okay.
And of course, empathy is absolutely fundamental for building strong relationships. It's that knowing when a friend needs you to just listen versus when they actually want advice, or even being able to handle frustrations at work without letting it negatively impact your whole team.
Right, right. Okay, so I'm seeing how all this kind of weaves into everything we do.
Yeah, it's really pervasive.
Why does it matter, though? Like, why do we need to actively work on these skills?
Well, this is where How to Human really emphasizes that emotional intelligence and empathy are really the foundation for human connection. They're what bind us together. When we don't have those skills, our relationships can suffer. Misunderstandings become really common. Conflicts can feel impossible to resolve. We might act impulsively and then regret it later. We may not be as sensitive to how our words and actions are impacting other people. And all of that can really lead to feeling isolated and dissatisfied.
So it's kind of like you're missing this key ingredient for really connecting.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the benefits then? What are the positives?
Well, the rewards are huge. People with strong EQ, they tend to manage stress a lot better. They build healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
Okay.
Their decisions are less impulsive, more thoughtful. And they're so much better equipped to handle those inevitable setbacks that life throws at us. They're not as easily overwhelmed by their emotions. They also have this really amazing capacity to offer support to other people without getting completely drain themselves.
Mm.
How to Human argues that strong EQ really does make you a better friend, a better partner, a better colleague, a better problem solver, even a better leader.
Okay, I'm convinced. So how do we actually go about building our emotional intelligence?
Well, it all starts with self-awareness. You can't manage what you don't recognize.
Yeah.
So the guide suggests that throughout your day, you just pause and check in with yourself. Just ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And what's causing me to feel this way?
Hmm.
Keeping a journal to track your emotional experiences can be really useful too. It can help you identify those patterns. Like, oh, I always seem to get really frustrated in this particular type of situation. And understanding the root cause of your emotions can be really powerful.
Okay, so it's like taking an emotional inventory almost.
Exactly.
So what's the next step after that?
The next key piece is self-regulation. And it's important to remember that this isn't about suppressing your feelings or pretending that they don't exist.
Right.
It's about learning to manage them so that they don't control you. And How to Human introduces this really simple but powerful technique called the pause technique.
Oh, I like that.
Right. It's so simple. And it's basically when you're feeling a strong emotion, especially like anger or frustration, just take a breath before you react. That tiny little pause can make all the difference between responding thoughtfully and just reacting impulsively in a way that you might regret.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's really about creating that space to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what about empathy? That ability to connect with others on an emotional level. How do we cultivate that?
Active listening is huge. And How to Human really emphasizes this. It's about giving someone your full, undivided attention, really focusing on what they're saying, both the words they're using and their body language, without thinking about what you want to say next.
No.
Ask open-ended questions, like how did that make you feel, to encourage them to share more, and then reflect back what you've heard so that they know that you're really trying to understand their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
There's this really interesting point in the guide, too, about how reading fiction can actually boost your empathy.
That's cool.
Right. Because when you immerse yourself in the lives and the viewpoints of different characters, you're actually broadening your own emotional understanding.
I like that a lot.
Hmm.
How to Human also mentions the 24-hour rule. What is that all about?
Oh, yeah, the 24-hour rule. So this is a strategy for dealing with situations that are just really emotionally charged. The idea is, before you respond to something that's triggered you, you give yourself a full day to kind of step back and process what happened. Because often those initial feelings are really intense, but they might change or become less intense with a little bit of time and distance.
Mhm.
And that waiting period can prevent you from saying or doing something in the heat of the moment that you'll probably regret later.
That's smart.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are all like really good practical steps. What about some of the challenges that we might hit when we're trying to improve our EQ? How to Human talks about some of those too,
It does.
like defensiveness.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that.
Yeah.
Defensiveness is a very human response. It's that urge to justify ourselves or explain away blame when we get negative feedback or when we're in a conflict. And How to Human really emphasizes this shift from reacting defensively to responding thoughtfully.
Mm-hmm.
And the key is to pause, take that breath. And instead of immediately jumping to defend yourself, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? And that can really open you up to valuable insights and prevent the situation from escalating unnecessarily.
But that's hard to do.
It is. It takes practice.
Yeah.
But it's so worth it.
Totally. What about feeling emotionally overwhelmed?
Oh, yeah. This is a big one. Especially for people who are naturally very empathetic, because they can start to feel like they're absorbing everyone else's emotions. And How to Human introduces this idea of emotional boundaries, which is so important. It's about being caring and supportive without taking on other people's pain as your own. So it's things like practicing self-care, setting limits on how much you give in situations that are really draining you, and recognizing that you can be there for someone without having to fix their problems. You can be a compassionate listener without becoming totally consumed by their struggles.
Right, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
The other challenge that the guide mentions is having trouble seeing beyond your own perspective,
Right.
which is kind of a lack of empathy, right?
Right.
So what does How to Human say about that?
Well, they have this technique called the three perspectives technique, which is especially helpful in conflicts. So the first step is to identify your own perspective. What are your thoughts and feelings? What are your needs in the situation?
Okay.
But then you try to understand what the other person's perspective might be. What are
Okay.
they feeling? What might be motivating them? And then finally, you try to imagine how a neutral third party who's not emotionally invested in the situation at all, how they might view the situation.
Okay.
And this is really helpful because it forces you to step outside of your own head and see things from a broader, more objective perspective.
Yeah, it's like taking off the blinders.
Yeah.
So to illustrate all of this, how to human.
Hmm.
Give some real-world examples,
Yes.
like the workplace scenario. What does that look like?
So this is a great example of the difference between a manager who has low EQ versus one who has high EQ. So imagine a situation where an employee's work isn't quite up to par. A manager with low EQ might just say something like, "Your work isn't good enough, fix it,"
Right.
which is not helpful. It just leaves the employee feeling demoralized and unclear about how to improve.
Right.
But a manager with high EQ might say something like, "Hey, I noticed some areas where we could make some improvements. I'd love to go over those with you so that you can really succeed."
Mhm.
They're offering specific feedback, they're framing it in a way that emphasizes growth, and they're even offering to collaborate.
Yeah,
And that's going to have such a different impact on the employee's motivation and their future performance.
totally. And how to human also talks about some examples from history and personal life, too.
Yes. It highlights Abraham Lincoln as a leader who really demonstrated exceptional emotional intelligence, especially his empathy and his ability to connect with and understand people who had completely different viewpoints from his own. And this was crucial because he was leading during a time when the country was incredibly divided.
Right.
And the guide contrasts him with some other historical figures who really lacked EQ. And that often led to all kinds of problems like conflicts, bad decisions, and just a lot of discord.
Mm-hmm.
And then on a personal level, How to Human talks about the example of a really supportive friend, someone who truly listens, who validates your feelings, and who offers support without trying to immediately solve all your problems for you. And that's a great example of what emotional intelligence looks like in those everyday relationships.
Right. It's like actually being present.
Exactly.
Okay, so all these examples are super helpful in making this stuff really tangible.
Yeah.
And to help everybody kind of reflect on all this how to human, throws out some questions.
It does.
So what are those questions?
Yeah. So these questions are all about looking inward. So first, how well do you recognize and manage your own emotions?
Right.
When you're listening to someone, are you really trying to understand their perspective? Or are you mostly thinking about what you want to say next?
Mm-hmm.
Think about a recent situation where you reacted emotionally, and later on you wished you had responded differently. What could you have done differently? How do you usually handle criticism? Do you get defensive or do you try to learn from it?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe most importantly, what is one small, concrete step that you could take today to start improving your emotional intelligence?
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive into emotional intelligence and empathy,
Yeah.
what's the key takeaway? What's the main message here?
The big takeaway is that emotional intelligence is not about suppressing your emotions. It's not about becoming some kind of robot who doesn't feel anything. It's about understanding your emotions, learning to manage them effectively, and then using that understanding to build stronger, more meaningful connections with yourself and with the people around you.
That is so good. So as you go about your week, think about just choosing one of the techniques we talked about,
Okay.
like the pause technique or active listening,
Mm-hmm.
and just try it out. See what happens. See what you learned about yourself and the people that you interact with. Thanks for sending in this how-to human stuff.
Yeah,
And for joining us on this deep dive into emotional intelligence and empathy.
absolutely.
We'll see you next time.